Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Now Showing with
Cam?
and John.
Not used to doing it that way.
Yeah.
Whew, feel
All
special.
right, so today is another sort of fan-inspired video list that we're gonna do. Our fan did want us to do. It is something that we have on the works. It is actually taking certain directors and kind of breaking down their history of movies and that sort of thing. So just for them as just kind of like a hold them over, we're doing our top 5 movie directors of all time, which there is a ton to pick from. And the way that we did this, it's because our lists probably are going to upset a few people because we didn't really pick like your 100% Academy Award winning directors or like movies that are just box office smashes and stuff. There are movies and directors that we enjoy, maybe the way they shoot the film, maybe the way that they see different things, the visuals, something that like we hold dear instead of like, oh yeah, the critics say that he's the best director,
Just a
like it's gotta
opinion,
be. Yeah. So with that, I do have a couple honorable mentions. I had to because I don't really hold them in high regards, but I hold the movies and I hold this time period in general very close, and that is the Universal monster movies. And some of those directors you're talking about: Carl Freund, Todd Browning, George Wagner, James Whale, Jack Arnold, and then the one that I'm going to go into a little bit more because he's actually one that kind of influenced them, and that is F.W. Murnau. He's the guy that directed Nosferatu. You have to really give this guy some mad props for what he did, for what they had back then. You're talking 1922 and a silent movie and just the atmosphere that he created. And just real quick to back up a little bit, if you're not really familiar what exactly a director does, because it is kind of like, what's he do? He just kind of tells the people what to do. No, he has like, he's the say all, do all. He picks how the different like cuts are going to be, how the camera angles are going to be, how the actors are, like he wants the actors to act. He kind of picks and like I know I need you to come with it. Like imagine that your dog just died. Like bring that kind of emotion. Like he really does do a lot more than just kind of like sit there and be like, all right, do this, do that. Like he really brings everything together. So that's kind of like, it's his vision. How he visions the movie is what he's putting into it. So without anything further, I'm gonna start. And with this list, this was one that I came up with the help of other fans. And I didn't think it was going to be that hard until I really sat down to look at it. We kind of agreed that we're not going to do ties and that kind of stuff as much. I had to. And I have a legitimate argument for it because the two that I picked for number 5, I picked them for the same reason. They revolutionized horror movies one way or another. The first person that I picked was George A. Romero. Without this guy, we wouldn't have zombie movies that we have today. I am a diehard zombie fan. I love zombie movies. I just think that the zombie character in general is just an amazing idea. Whether it's fast zombies, slow zombies, whether it's a virus or whatever it is that is bringing them back, I think they're amazing. And George A. Romero is the pioneer of that genre. Without his 1967 Night of the Living Dead, we wouldn't have The Walking Dead. We wouldn't have World War Z. We wouldn't have like Resident Evil, because we're big gamers too. Like when you think of zombies today, they would still be your white zombie, voodoo style zombie. So I and like the way that he shot Night of the Living Dead is basically what I'm really basing, because he does have like the entire Dead trilogy. His Creepshow contribution was incredible. Monkey Shines is one that I often forget about. Mm-hmm. Another just amazing movie. The Crazies, which not the biggest fan of this, but it did spawn an amazing remake, which if you didn't see our remake video, make sure to go check that. And then one that kind of gets a lot of shit, but I do enjoy it, is his movie Martin, based on a kid that thinks he's a vampire but isn't really a vampire. But just what he did with like an extremely low budget like zombie movie, creating that atmosphere, creating like the different shots and cuts and like just bringing us zombie movies. And then the other person I'm not going to go into too much on is Wes Craven, because we have talked about him before, and the reason that I put him and George A. Romero at 5 as a tie is because without Wes Craven, there's a chance that we really wouldn't have horror movies that we have today. But not just because of that. I mean, he has an amazing. You have a Nightmare Before Christmas. No, Nightmare on Elm Street. You have The Hills Have Eyes. You have The People Under the Stairs. Shocker, an extremely underrated horror movie that he did. You have The Wishmaster. Another like. Whenever you think of Wes Craven, like you think of Scream and you think of A Nightmare on Elm Street, but some of these other ones, like, they don't get enough like attention that they really should. But the reason that I have him on the list is for the Scream series, and primarily the first Scream. We have talked about this on a couple other lists. 1996, what was it, 92 to like 90 to 96 roughly, like in that era, early 90s. Like you really didn't see horror movies because like they just a lot of the
at least not at the box office.
Yeah, not at the box. They were like
video.
straight to DVD. You didn't have that like box office like The Exorcist, Halloween. You didn't have those movies because like the industry kind of got polluted with just like companies just throwing movies out. So the industry kind of got away from it. They didn't want to back it up. But 1996, we all know what movie came out, the first Scream. Wes Craven, he took a chance. He made this movie, and it just exploded.
Yep.
And it gave us like that teen slasher movie of the late 90s into the 2000s. And like I said, we've talked about it before. Like without that movie, without Wes Craven, like bringing out Scream, there's a good chance that like. Who knows what we would be talking about on our channel right now, like new movie wise. We would just be all back in like 70s, 80s. But so yeah, that was my number 5. Like it was hard for me to like separate those two because of like the contribution to horror movies they both had. Both of them like are.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
And I was like, you know what? I think Cameron might let this slide if I do a tie because it wasn't like just random two. Like I didn't want to pick between the two. Like it was the reason that they were.
Yeah, it makes sense. I can agree with that for sure. Yeah, I knew this was going to be a pretty tough list to put together because you're talking about so many directors over the decades.
And you don't have like a genre to like fall into.
I mean, just
like...
some of these names: Alfred Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick, Martin Scorsese, James Cameron, George Lucas, Ridley Scott, Tim Burton, David Fincher, William Friedkin, Peter Jackson, George Romero, all of these names, and not one of them are on my list. And if you're hitting the stop button on the video, I understand now. But this is my list, and like John said, this is a list of movies of directors that I feel made movies that really are big to me, that I grew up on. So those names that I just mentioned, they have some great movies, and some of those directors have a movie or two that are absolute classics in my mind that I absolutely love, or maybe even a handful, but they didn't make as many movies that are meaningful than the directors I'm about to name.
Yeah, and this is a list that I'm really intrigued because a lot of times whenever we come up with a list like vampire movies, werewolf movies, etc., I kind of have an idea of what's going to be on his list to an extent. A couple things usually surprise me. This is one that we've never really like talked about. We've really just talked about genres, certain movies, that kind of stuff. We haven't really got into like directors, so I'm really intrigued to kind of see where he goes with this because I think he'll be a little surprised by some of mine too.
Yeah, so my number 5, the director I chose, it's weird because he doesn't have any movies that I consider my favorites, but I like all of his movies. So for me, that qualified him in being in the top 5 because every movie he makes, I at least enjoy it. Some more than others, but he doesn't have any bad movies in my opinion. So that qualified him. My number 5 is Quentin Tarantino. I mean, we're talking Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, Kill Bill, Volume 1, Volume 2, Grindhouse, the Death Proof story in that, Inglorious Bastards, Django Unchained, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I mean, his movies, every time I watch one, I am fully enthralled in the movie. I think he's one of the best, not only directors, but writers in terms of dialogue, because a lot of his movies, through so many of the scenes, there's not a whole lot of action that occurs. I mean, yes, in Kill Bill, of course there is, but a lot of his movies, you will go in these 15, 20-minute sessions of just maybe two characters in full dialogue, and you're just sitting there just listening to it with full attention, because the characters and what they're saying is so meaningful, and he has a way of making his characters talk that you just really get involved with these characters. His newest film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, went and saw that this past year. Absolutely loved it. I thought Brad Pitt stole the show in that movie. That movie was fantastic. And there's really no action other than literally the final 15 minutes. It's very slow throughout, but I loved every minute of it. And that's why I think Tarantino, for me, qualifies in the top 5, because although his movies don't always have a whole lot of action, and like I said, I don't put any of his movies in like my top 10. I don't even have Pulp Fiction right in my top 10. But they all are really good, and he just doesn't make bad movies. So for me, some of those other directors I named, like Scorsese and all that, yeah, they have some fantastic movies, but they also have movies I either haven't seen or some I just didn't like. I can't say that about Tarantino. Yeah. So I put him in at number 5.
I can agree with that. All right, so my number 4 is going to be Tim Burton, and solely for his creative eye. Let's look at Beetlejuice, the original, well, not the original, the 90s Batman trilogy, Sleepy Hollow, Mars Attacks, Edward Scissorhands, and even A Nightmare Before Christmas. Even though he did not direct A Nightmare Before Christmas, he wrote it. It was actually directed by Henry Selick. But it's one that you have to bring up when you're talking about like the director's vision.
His style.
Yeah. I mean, the worlds that he would create, because the other ones that I wrote, that I mentioned, other than obviously Batman, are either written by him or 100% what his vision was. He has done some other ones, and I feel that newer Tim Burton has kind of went downhill as far as like the actual movies, but the vision is still there. I still like watching him to just see the worlds that he creates and everything. But 90s Tim Burton, you really can't go wrong with Edward Scissorhands, from like the town, the color, the palette, how bright certain scenes are when he's in there. Whenever he goes to the castle, in like the lab, the dark, drab colors, his different like cuts, and just everything that he would create. Like even like building Gotham, like a dark, twisted Gotham in his vision was incredible. He really put like his own touch on that movie. Like you're talking about like a series, or basically a character, a town that's been around since the 40s in the Batman comic books.
Yeah.
And like he really made, like you felt like you were there. You felt like the characters were like his envisioning. Like think about his Danny DeVito as the Penguin. Like think of like Michael Keaton's Batman, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. Like those are, whenever you think of Batman movies, like at least for me, like the Tim Burton Batmans come to mind before the Christopher Nolans, honestly, other than Heath Ledger.
Oh wow.
But like that's just because Heath Ledger killed it. But when I really think of like the Batman movies, I think of like the 90s Tim Burtons. And like I said, it's literally just for his vision, the crazy worlds that he comes up with. That is literally 90s Tim Burton is almost untouchable. So that's why he's in my top 5.
Cool. And I love his version of Sleepy Hollow too.
Yeah, that's
awesome
another
movie.
one that's kind of underrated in like the somewhat horror.
So my number 4 happened to be one of this guy's number 5, and that is Wes Craven, the late Wes Craven, of course. Wes Craven's movies mean so much to me. There was no way he wasn't going to make it on this list. And even though he's not going to be critically acclaimed by the Hollywood Foreign Press or something as one of the greatest directors, to me he is, because his movies I grew up with. Of course, A Nightmare on Elm Street is his most iconic. It completely frightened an entire generation of people in the 80s, and it spawned one of the most iconic horror villains of all time in Freddy Krueger. And of course, he also directed the New Nightmare in the 90s, which was his direct callback to the first one.
Wasn't A Nightmare on Elm Street, wasn't that like your entry to horror movies at the ripe age of like 6 months?
Yeah, pretty much. It was my 2 years old, actually. Yeah, and it was the first horror film that I remember seeing at the age of 2, and I remember getting a Freddy Krueger doll was one of my gifts on Christmas at age 3. He also, of course, like John mentioned, was the director behind all 4 Scream films. Of course, with the first one being the most iconic. I won't retouch all of that. We know what that movie meant to horror movies. But also, when you're talking about a movie, for me personally, The People Under the Stairs. Mm-hmm. I've said it before, I think it's one of the most underrated horror films of all time. Not in terms of scares, but just in terms of sheer quality and how on edge of seat you are while watching that movie from start to finish. I think it is such a great movie. You're talking about even in his original early days with The Last House on the Left, which although is a very hard film to watch because of how brutal it is, it also showed what type of a risk taker and what chances Wes Craven took back in that time, making a film so dark and showing the dark side of art and how, unfortunately, things like this happen in the real world. The Hills Have Eyes, which was an iconic horror film back then and spawned remakes and sequels. Shocker, which is another underrated horror film. I wouldn't consider it a great, but it's still a very fun horror movie to watch. Wes Craven is responsible for just some of the best and most fun horror movies. Mm-hmm. There was no way he wasn't going to make my list. So, of course, yes. At number 4, Wes Craven.
All right. So, my number 3, once again, was on this guy's list. Mm-hmm. But he's on my list for kind of a different reason. I completely love this guy's films. It's not just that like all of his films are good. I hold them at a higher regard than he does, and that is Quentin Tarantino. And when I was doing this list, and when I was thinking of like the directors that I love, I was thinking of directors like that grab me in a different way. That like they don't make movies. Like you could say Michael Bay is an amazing director. In my opinion, he's really not. He makes good movies. He makes fun movies because they're just action-packed, mm-hmm. explosions, chase scenes. Like you can make a good movie and be considered a good director just because you make a hell of a action. Just keeps you. That's what keeps your mind focused. It takes a lot of talent to keep focus and make just like have you completely engrossed, forgetting about everything else that's going on around you. 100% like on dialogue for the most part, and that's what Quentin Tarantino just destroys. His writing, his directing, and like Cameron had pointed out, like taking 2 people and like 15-20 minute like scenes, and it's just them going back and forth, and it's just some of the most entertaining dialogue.
Yep.
I like honestly, I don't think there is a better director director/writer, because he did write.
He writes
some of them. Like there's not a better director when it comes to dialogue.
Yeah.
I mean, Inglourious Bastards is one that is a little more action-packed. Kill Bill, more action-packed. Django Unchained, more action-packed. But when you're getting into, like, Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs a little bit. You're talking about, like, 4 Rooms. If you've never seen the movie 4 Rooms, I highly recommend this movie. It's a somewhat lesser-known Quentin Tarantino movie. It also has Robert Rodriguez and 2 other directors. Basically what it takes place is in a hotel. Each director directs a certain room in this hotel. The entire story gets tied together. It all gets tied together by Timothy Roth, who plays the bellhop. Amazing. Also, he did The Grindhouse, obviously, and he also did some of the directing in Sin City with Frank Miller and Robert Rodriguez. Also, he was the 3rd director. It was the 3 of them in like a collaboration. Yeah. The other 2 kind of had a bigger role in it, but he did do that. But like just the Pulp Fiction, like the dialogue between Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta. I mean, it's just incredible. So I knew, like, there was a couple on here that as soon as we talked about doing directors, I knew that they were going to be somewhere on this list. And Quentin Tarantino, I'd be lying if I didn't put him on my list. I would, like, if this list was like Scorsese, Cameron, Spielberg, Lucas, like, it would have just been me bullshitting just to pick, like, so.
Yeah, I agree in everything you just said. So for my number 3, you're talking about a director that made my favorite slasher movie of all time, and you're talking about a director that also made the best sci-fi horror movie ever created. So how does that not make my list and rank pretty high? My pick at number 3 of greatest directors of all time, in my opinion, is John Carpenter. Of course, the movies I'm talking about are Halloween for the slasher category and The Thing for the sci-fi horror. Halloween is my all-time favorite slasher movie. Michael Myers, in my opinion, is the best horror villain of all time. If I wasn't counting Jaws in the horror category, then I would put Halloween as my favorite horror movie of all time. There's not a slasher movie that's meant more to me, and that's all because of John Carpenter. Michael Myers is because of John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. But that movie is absolute perfection, and if anyone wants to study the art of horror films and how to make or direct a great horror film, then that is the movie I feel like every film student should watch. From the way Carpenter would film the scenes of Michael sitting up in the background and the score kicking in at that exact time, or looming over the shoulder of Jamie Lee Curtis, or seeing just his face in the distance for a brief second and then pulling away, how he made you feel. You know, if you talk to someone who hasn't watched Halloween in years, but you ask them, what do you remember about Halloween? Oh my God, that movie's so terrifying. It's so bloody. There's so much stabbing, right? But there's really none of that. But the movie's so magically done, or well done, I should say, that you think you're seeing things that you're not. That makes you think that this is such a violent and vile movie, but it's not. And it's just so beautifully done in so many ways. And that's the same thing with The Thing. The Thing is just so amazing in terms of practical effects, the acting, the setting, how it was all put together, how Carpenter just takes you and makes you think that one thing's going to happen, and then just boom, pulls the floor out from under you and hits you with another big surprise. Like, of course, you have the blood test scene where they're all trying to see who's infected and who's not, and you get the big jump scare. There's so much to that movie, and that's not all. I mean, Escape from New York, a really fun movie as well. Christine, great Stephen King adaptation that I thought he did well. They Live with Roddy Piper. Village of the Dam remake. Prince of Darkness. He has a whole hit of horror films and even other genre films. But for me, just the fact that he did Michael Myers or Halloween and The Thing, I had to have him up there. So my number 3 is John Carpenter.
Yeah. He didn't make my list. But if we were doing top 10, he would be on my list. But I couldn't put him in top 5. Alright, so I had opened this video up with naming, like, the Universal Monster directors. Because, I mean, without them, without those movies, like, we really wouldn't have horror movies that we have today. One that I could have named in there is actually my number 2. And this is going to be one of the few on here. Actually, really, when you look at it, my list could technically be a cliche, like, Critics' Choice list. But my number 2 is 100% a cliche, Critics' Choice. But I could not have him in my list. And that is Alfred Hitchcock. Once again, without this guy, without what he has done, I 100% agree with what he said about John Carpenter and film students. Right in line with that is Psycho. I feel they should have to watch those 2 movies. What Alfred Hitchcock built with that movie, the suspense, and once again, there's not a lot of blood. There's really none, other than, like, the opening scene. Well, not really opening, but early in the movie, the iconic bathroom scene. Other than that, you don't have, like, a bunch of, like, gory scenes, but still, it builds that suspense. The way he does his cuts, the way that he basically, one of Alfred Hitchcock's famous quotes is, "I love to play the audience like a piano." And that's just what he does.
Yeah.
You never really know what's going to happen, where he's going to go. Just when you kind of think you have, like, oh, I know exactly where, like, he completely, it's like he knows that you're going to figure, like, this is where you think he's going, and then he just takes it another direction. And it's not just Psycho that he does that with, like, all of his movies. Like, he truly is, like, the master of suspense, the master of, like, mystery.
Yeah.
And you're talking back in, like, early 40s, 50s, 60s, like black and white movies. And he was directing, I do believe, like into the 80s before he passed away. I mean, you have The Birds, you have Psycho, North by Northwest, Vertigo, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Rear Window, Dial M for Murder. All amazing, suspenseful, old black and white movies that, in my opinion, they still hold up today. There's a lot of old black and white movies, like, yeah, they're good and like they are critically acclaimed, but I don't feel that they really hold up because what they were portraying, the time period and that kind of stuff, it just doesn't relate to today. But literally, you can pretty much take any of Hitchcock's movies, and yeah, they might be done in that time period, but you can just as easily like imagine that happening today. And one really kind of fun fact is Alfred Hitchcock, a lot of people know, was kind of a solitary man. He really wasn't like your eccentric like director. He really didn't like to be in the limelight. And he won the 1967, give me one second, the Irving Thalberg Memorial Award at the Academy Awards in 1967. And he actually has a record because of his acceptance speech. He has the shortest acceptance speech ever. So when he went up to accept his speech, he picked up the award and he said, "Thank you," and he walks off. Like that. Like, he didn't like to be in the limelight. He just wanted to. And then one other fun fact: he wanted to shoot. I can't remember which movie it was. He wanted to shoot his movie at Walt Disney World. But Walt Disney told him that there's no way that he is going to shoot any of his movies because he's the director of that disgusting Psycho film. But, I mean, Alfred Hitchcock is just a legend. It might be cliche, but I mean, it's one of those, without him, once again, like, where would we be? And I just love his old black and white, so.
Yeah, I mean, Hitchcock, absolutely. I agree once again with everything you said. So for my number 2... this was not a name that stuck out to me when I was immediately thinking about directors. But as soon as I saw the name, I took a step back and I went, oh my goodness, this guy's right up there near my number 1. Because when I take a step back and I think to myself, if somebody asked me the question, what are the classics to you? Well, there's your critically acclaimed classics. But when you're asking, what are the classics to me? To me, a classic, in my opinion, is something that personally you can just keep going back and watching over and over again, right? It's a movie that, like, you can watch it, maybe see it on TV the next day, and be like, I could watch this again. Or maybe as a kid, you just keep going through them over and over again, right? That's the classics, in my opinion. And there isn't someone, I don't think, that's made more than my number 2 pick. My number 2 pick, if I was on an island and I could only pick 1 or 2 directors' filmography, I'd probably pick his along with my number 1 because his movies I can just watch over and over again. So, my number 2 pick is John Hughes.
Knew it. Knew it.
If you're not familiar with John Hughes, which you should be, but maybe some of you don't because his name doesn't get mentioned as much as it should, let me read off a little list to you. Now, not all of these movies did he direct, but if he didn't direct it, he wrote it and produced it. And even the ones he did direct, he wrote. 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Uncle Buck, National Lampoon's Vacation, European Vacation, Christmas Vacation, a little movie called Home Alone, Home Alone 2, Home Alone 3, Beethoven, Dennis the Menace, and a whole lot more.
Yeah, he is one director that died way too soon.
Yeah.
Like, he died in his prime. Like,
tragically passed away from a heart attack. And this guy is responsible for what I consider the classics, right? They're not all the most critically acclaimed films, but I bet all of you watching this, out of that list, there's one or probably more, probably most, that are you consider movies that you watch over and over again, and you probably didn't even know John Hughes was the man behind them. Because even though he is a very well credited director, he doesn't get, in my opinion, the credit that he deserves. He's not a name that comes up really when people are talking about top-notch directors. But he also wrote these movies. He created these iconic characters. Home Alone, Ferris Bueller, Uncle Buck, 16 Candles, Weird Science, The Breakfast Club. These are pop culture icon characters, and they all came from the mind of John Hughes. So when I saw his name, it just immediately took me back, and I said, oh my goodness, these are the movies that I grew up with. These are the movies that I love seeing when they're on TV. Every one of these movies I named are in my collection here. And like I said, if I was trapped on an island, I'd have some John Hughes movies, because John Hughes movies make you feel good, they make you laugh, they make you cry, they bring out the whole range of emotions, and we all grew up with them, and we all love them. So you might be sitting there going, oh, John, come on. John Hughes is awesome, and he's my number 2.
Yeah, I definitely didn't think of that, but you're 100% right. So that's that's an amazing pick, actually. All right, so I think we're on number 1. So
We are on number 1.
my number 1 was really hard for me to pick, because like I said, I made my top 10. I had a bunch of other directors on there, and I initially wrote down Stanley Kubrick, and I wrote him down. He's not my pick. I wrote him down solely for one movie, and it's not the movie you're thinking. It's not Full Metal Jacket. It's not The Shining. It's not 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's a little movie based off of Anthony Burgess' novel that I consider to be my all-time favorite novel. It's the novel that I read more than any other, and that is A Clockwork Orange.
'Cause I'm singing.
Yep. A little bit of the ultra-violence.
Yes.
So this book, and one thing about Stanley Kubrick, and this is kind of actually the reason why I nudged him out, even though I'll probably anger some people. All the movies that he did were adaptations from novels. He didn't write any of them, and that's sort of why I kind of bumped him out. Not that like that really discredits him, because what he did create from those novels, bringing those novels alive, was perfection, and that was, in my opinion, the best like version of that, or the best like example of that, I should say, is A Clockwork Orange. Like I said, I've read this book more times than any other, and the way that he brought that world alive, the way that he created Alex, and like Alex is an extremely messed up individual in this movie, but the way that he makes him, you almost can feel for him, because like what the book is really about, and one of my interpretations, and a lot of other people, is when you think of A Clockwork Orange, what is a clockwork? It is a mechanical piece of like equipment or whatever. What is an orange? It's something natural. And basically, when you really look at it, Alex is the orange, the government and everything is the clockwork, and it's how the government tries to control, and that's basically what you get in this movie, about how he is a delinquent youth that has his gang, and they try to basically rehabilitate him, and basically, like I said, Stanley Kubrick just brought flesh to that book. Do I think that it is completely accurate, or it like the movie is better than the book? Hell no. The book is still by far better. There's a lot more in depth to it, but it is really good. So the director that nudged him out, and this is kind of probably anger a lot of people, but kind of what Cameron said, whenever you're looking at a director and what they did, what it meant to you, that's what I went with, and that is Darren Aronofsky. And the reason is you have The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke, you have The Fountain, Requiem for a Dream, Pi, Black Swan, Noah, Mother. Do I think all these movies are incredible? No. But what I do think is incredible is his eye for building some of the craziest worlds, the way that he does different cuts, transitions, everything. I hold him slightly above, obviously, Tim Burton. Tim Burton and Darren Aronofsky both made my list for their directing eye and how they build worlds. Also, when I was in school, one of the people that we had to do basically make a short movie, and the biggest influence on the movie that I made was Darren Aronofsky's Pi. If you've never seen it, it's about when I'm saying pie, I'm not talking about cherry pie. I'm talking about the mathematical figure of pi, and it's basically about that, about how it drives the guy crazy. If you've never seen it, I recommend it, but I don't recommend it at the same time. It takes a certain type of film lover to like this movie, which I happen to be. It's a beautifully shot black and white, artsy college film. But from that, he went to make some of the most crazy, just Requiem for a Dream was my all-time favorite movie for the year that it came out. If you haven't checked that video out, I do recommend that. I recommend all of our videos, actually. But it's just that the way that he does his different cuts, like in Requiem for a Dream, it is a drug movie about the horrors of what drugs do to you, and like when they get high, how it goes to their eyes, and the way he uses like the camera to go into their eye and shows the pupil dilate and into the bloodstream and all this kind of stuff, and like he uses that as a transition to basically in The Fountain. Basically, like The Fountain was a somewhat hard movie to follow. I had to watch it a couple times to really truly like appreciate it. But come on, the visuals, even if you just watch it just for the visuals, like the world, the way the tree, just everything was incredible. And the wrestler, I mean, Mickey Rourke's performance in it, and just the way that he built that, like the rise and fall of like a wrestler, like you felt for it, like it sucked you into like that kind of gritty underground wrestling. And once again, the way that he shot the different like cuts and like he is, when it comes to a vision, this is who I consider to be the greatest visionary director, is Darren Aronofsky. And I mean the other movies, like they're good for what they are, but I mean Pi, Requiem for a Dream, The Fountain, and The Wrestler are basically what I consider to be his shining examples of films. Requiem for a Dream obviously being the top of that. So
yeah, I'm the exact opposite here. His number one was hard to choose. Mine was extremely simple to choose. There wasn't anything that really came close for me. My number one director of all time also happened to direct my favorite film of all time, which is Jaws. So if that doesn't give it away, but it's not just Jaws, it's his masterpiece of films he's put together. Obviously, my favorite director of all time, the person I'm speaking of, is Steven Spielberg. You can say
who's that?
Yeah, you can say it's cliche or whatever, but in my opinion, no one comes close. You know, Jaws is my favorite movie of all time. I think it is by far the perfect film that's out there. I mentioned earlier about film students should watch Halloween in terms of studying horror. Jaws is the movie I think all film students should watch in terms of studying film. Everything is perfect about this movie, and let's take a look at some of his other films here, right? I don't want to just talk about Jaws. We all know Jaws. We know it's my favorite, and I could talk about it all day, but we're talking about Indiana Jones and sequels here. We're talking about E.T. We're talking about Hook. We're talking about Jurassic Park. We're talking about Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, War of the Worlds, and Ready Player One, a more recent picture, which me and John absolutely fell in love with.
Yes.
Look, here's why it's Spielberg, in my opinion, and no one else. A couple reasons, actually. Number one, a lot of these other directors who have made films over the years that are just phenomenal movies, there's a common trend with a lot of movies that happened in the past. There's a common line that a lot of people say, love that movie, but it doesn't hold up all that great today. Or it just doesn't hold up all that well. It's more nostalgia for me, right? There's a lot of movies that unfortunately fall in that. Maybe it's the acting, maybe it's the effects. There is not a single Steven Spielberg film that doesn't transcend time. Every single Spielberg film holds up just as much today as it when it came out 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Like his filmography, honestly, like if you were to like make a time capsule and you put all of his films in, I'd be willing to bet that in even 100 years from now, like they would still be like relevant. Still hold up.
I mean, you're talking about, once again with Jaws, a mechanical shark in the 70s that today looks better than ever on
they
4K
still can't
picture.
copy it. They can't even they can't even like come close to what they did there with CGI.
Yeah.
Like it's
my son, who's only 1, so I haven't really got him into movies yet. It's coming. He's been watching one movie. He'll watch about 40 minutes of it, and then he starts running all over the place. But he is absolutely obsessed with E.T. right now. I actually had an E.T. collectible plush doll here in the movie room. It's now somewhere out in the living room because that's all he does is hold that thing and run with it. He says E.T. It's one of the very few words he says, and that's what he runs around the house saying because he's obsessed. Steven Spielberg movies are some of my favorite early memories as a kid, and that's one of the other reasons why I think it can't be anyone else. Because I think along the way for all of us, somewhere along the line in your early dose of film, a Spielberg movie is what brought you into loving movies. Maybe it was E.T., maybe it was Jaws, maybe it was Jurassic Park, depending on when you were born. But somewhere along the line, Spielberg brought the magic of movies. And when my son gets a little bit older, I guarantee you the Spielberg collection is going to be the first set of movies that I'm most excited to show him. Because not only do his movies transpire time, but they make people want to make movies. Mm-hmm. If you've ever wanted to make movies or be in this industry, I guarantee you after watching a Spielberg film is when those thoughts were at their height or at their highest point. Because his movies are all magical, they're all phenomenal, they're all memorable, and they're all classics. And it doesn't matter if we're on the spectrum of E.T. or the importance of Schindler's List, the grittiness of Saving Private Ryan, or his most recent Ready Player One, which is a complete CGI film, but works to perfection.
Yeah.
So for me, this was a no-brainer. I believe the greatest director of all time is Spielberg, because the movies he puts out, the way he shoots them, and how particular he is, there's a reason why his movies don't get old or aren't bad movies, and that's because he brilliantly directs all of them. So for me, number 1 had to be Steven Spielberg.
Yep. Yeah, I can agree with both of our lists. I mean, this is one of those lists that I could keep re-looking and changing. You can make arguments for so many different. Because I mean, there's even you have the Coen brothers we didn't mention. You have David Cronenberg we didn't. There's so many different directors that and really when you look at it, there's directors that maybe did one movie, but that one movie was incredible. But they don't get the credit because they don't have an extensive list of movies they've done. But in that one movie, you could make an argument for them.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
I hope you guys liked this list. I hope you liked the video. If you don't agree with us, please let us know in the comments. Let us know what your picks are. We would love to see who you agree with more, me or him. If you have any ideas for videos that you would like to see, leave us a message. Check out our Facebook page. You can contact us on there. If you ever want to basically see us do a video on just a single movie, we're open to any suggestion. We have our core things that we like to do, but like we've kind of stated when we first started this channel, we really want this channel to be for you guys, what you guys want, what you want to see. So we're open to any suggestion, any ideas. We'll give you a shout out. We'll make the whole video 100% for you.
Yep.
If you like this video, check out our other ones. If you really like our videos, hit the subscribe button, hit that like button for us. Help us to continue to grow with you guys. And once again, we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching Now Showing with
Cam
and John.